Widespread confusion over former President Jacob Zuma's imprisonment. The Constitutional Court has sentenced him to 15 months behind bars for contempt, but it's also agreed to hear his application to scrap that sentence. There's little agreement on what happens in the meantime. So let's discuss this with Daven Dass from the Wits University Law Clinic and Power to Truth anchor JJ Tabane. Good evening to both of you. Daven, how's this going to play out? What are we likely to see on Tuesday and July the 12th?
Good evening, Jane, and good evening to the viewers. I think for me, firstly, at the outset, I can say that we are in unprecedented times in terms of the Constitutional Court order being rescinded. But in a nutshell, in terms of Tuesday, if we look to that hearing is essentially an application brought by Mr. Zuma in terms of which he wants to suspend his committal to prison. That means he wants to suspend the order. I'm of the opinion that that is going to be an unsuccessful application because you cannot have a lower court, given the hierarchy of courts in our country, turn down that particular judgment. Regarding the Constitutional Court order and the validity of that, essentially the former president is bringing an application in terms of which he is essentially rescinding. He is not appealing. That's a distinction which is of quite importance, and the reason for that is that an appeal suspends the order. And in this instance, being a rescission application, it does not. Ideally, what the former president should have done was essentially approach the same court, being the Constitutional Court, in respect of his application and ask for a suspension of that.
JJ, he accused the judiciary of corruption. I mean, it would be funny that if it wasn't so sad, right?
I know. Look, these are the last kicks of a dying horse, to use a metaphor, right? It's the end of the road, right? But Jacob Zuma is not known for accepting that a court process is the end of the road. That's why he's been in court for the last 15 years saying, I want my day in court. And even in the case, the corruption case that he's facing in the Pietermaritzburg High Court, he still arrives there and says, no, I don't want this prosecutor, I don't want this judge, etc. Another delaying tactic. So this is no different, right? I think Dalimpof knows that he can't advise his client, right, not to, in a sense, give in to the law. So he has to go to court to try and give an impression that they have asked the court to stay the arrest. But the reality is, as your legal expert was saying, a lower court cannot overrule what the Constitutional Court has said. But stranger things have happened in our country. I don't think anybody anticipated last week, right, that the Constitutional Court will even want to entertain this particular case. They have done so. They are going to listen to it. But quite frankly, they can only hope to come up maybe with a slightly lesser sentence. Maybe they'll say 12 months. Maybe they'll say 6 months. But the reality is, if they have agreed to hear it, then they have put themselves in a position, Jane, where they have to do something about it. They have at least have a discussion. And, the issue is, would their message that was so strongly worded in that judgment still remain? And I think they would want it to remain. I don't think they're going to go back on their word. I don't think they're going to be put in a position where, Jacob Zuma would now make them change their final decision, because it was quite thoroughly debated. That's why you had even had a minority judgment. But both of them agreed, right, both majority and minority judgments, that contempt was there. The question is, will they go back on the 12th in terms of the sentence? Finally, just on the press conference itself, Zuma didn't do himself any good, because he took exactly what the Constitutional Court complained about in terms of his disdain to the judiciary, and repeated it, and even made a worse situation where he is dangerously, Jane, compared our current jurisprudence with the apartheid. I mean, to come and play on the emotions of people and talk about detention without trial. It's truly crass, to put it mildly, because this was not a detention without trial. The reality is he was asked by no less a person than the Chief Justice to say, come and have your say, twice. Firstly, when the initial application was lodged by the Commission. Secondly, when the court was about to make a decision to say, tell us what you think would be the appropriate sentence. Now, if that is not how the alter temp rule, I'm not sure what it is. if that is not to say, we want to hear your side of the story, right? So it's not like he was not, like in the apartheid times where they just rounded you off, throw you into prison, they'll give you an opportunity. They gave him an opportunity in writing. And he wrote back to them to say, I don't care, go away, right? So I think that the court is going to take even more umbrage on the 12th, in my view. And this, what he said today, is exactly why the court would even be tempted to stick to its guns and send him to that 15 months imprisonment.
Do you think it's backfired, Daven? I mean, JJ, what you were saying that, you know, he really dipped into his struggle credentials to try and get some sort of sympathy here. But where do you think this leaves the ConCourt? I mean, what options are open to them now? They can't go back on what they've said, but can they tweak it a little bit? Will this play in his favour in any way?
Jane, I think, and JJ correctly and aptly says that I don't think the former president did himself much good in addressing the media tonight, but essentially in terming the judiciary as angry, or the judgment as angry, is, in my opinion, quite dangerous territory to be engaging with. And the reason for that is that the law must be applied. It must be applied without fear, favor, or prejudice. And if we start ascribing those notions in terms of which a judgment is, and we move away from a fundamental idea of the rule of law, which is so key and is so foundational to our constitutional dispensation, it is then rather worrying. And as all South Africans, we should be very concerned when the very bulwark of our constitutional democracy, being that of the court, is essentially being brought into question. I think also, as JJ points out, whilst the former president has made some work of the minority judgment, in fact, it was both the majority and the minority judgment which found that the former president was, in actual fact, in contempt. Okay,
JJ, the political ramifications of this, and I'm just wondering what government is weighing up here. I mean, they want the Zulu vote. Will this have any impact on the elections coming ahead? What does government need to do with this? I mean, the fissures there are clear. We've got Ace Magashule supporting Jacob Zuma, you know, yet another visual of the problems the party's in.
Look, President Ramaphosa has drawn a line in the sand, and those who support him in the ANC's national executive. When they got Ace Magashule suspended, that was drawing the line in the sand. And if there was going to be uproar, etc., it would have already happened. Because remember, the whole issue of Jacob Zuma now is also a proxy for the Magashule faction, in the sense that they are playing on the same sentiment of trying some kind of, insurrection, or I'll call it misplaced insurrection, that they assume will happen. A lot of people assume that if you suspended Ace, the whole country will be on fire. That didn't happen, right? There were pockets here and there of people calling for a shutdown. That was, that didn't happen. It was simply a ruse and a red herring. Same that has happened today. Yes, there were thousands of people going up and down Nkandla since the judgment was passed, but there's no insurrection. There's no, the skies are not going to fall. And this is the whole concept in justice, that justice must happen even if the heavens were to fall. And surely the political implications of this is that on Tuesday, if the court says this thing is dismissed, it means that the police must arrest President Zuma. And if they don't do that, the same way that if the Constitutional Court last week did not pronounce that he is guilty and he must go to prison, we are going to be in deep trouble politically in this country in terms of the path that we have chosen. Jane, we have chosen a path of the rule of law. We could have chosen many other paths. We could have chosen the path of Nuremberg trials. We could have chosen the paths, of continued strife and struggle. We didn't. We put a stop to it and said, let's build a new nation based on everybody being equal before the law. It seems like, right, President Zuma believes one way or another that he is actually above the law. And I promise you that I cannot have any other explanation but to believe that his disdain and his disdainful response to the ConCourt and the Chief Justice when he was asked, tell us what you think. And he wrote them a 21-page letter to tell them to go away. He believed deeply that they were not going to have the courage to actually imprison him because he sees himself as this big man, which is part of the trouble in many of our African leaders and freedom fighters, etc. That they take us to a point of freedom, and then they become the ones who oppress us. they are the ones who then go against the same values for which they were, just 2 decades ago prepared to die. So unfortunately, the implications for Ramaphosa are dire if he and his administration don't do what the Constitutional Court has instructed them to do come Tuesday.
Okay, do you think there might be a problem, though, when it comes to the police? I mean, we've seen in this that nobody's equal in South Africa. Zuma believes he's above the law. His supporters seem to be above the law, the way the police have been playing. I mean, ultimately, it is going to come down to them, isn't it?
Absolutely. They have shown that from time to time they can act and surprise us. You've seen what they did with the fees must fall, even though they do wrong things and ending up killing people, etc. You saw what they have done in Marikana. We don't want a repeat of that. But it doesn't follow that enforcement must mean bloodshed, right? They need to go. Zuma, as we've seen in the papers this Sunday, he's surrounded by the South African Police Service every day. He's a former president. He's entitled to VIP protection. So the police are not it's not like a common criminal who's run away. They don't know where he is. They know where he is all the time. They guard him. So they've got no excuse, Jane. This is a do-or-die moment for the Constitution of South Africa. Even if, we wait until the 12th, right, in terms of the court pronouncing. At the end of the day, if that court pronounces and stands by its decision that Zuma must be arrested, the police must do their work. It's inevitable. This thing that you saw this weekend was simply postponing the inevitable. By the way, if you listen carefully to what he said at the press conference, he says, he now changes his story a little bit. He's always been saying with bravado, I can go to jail tomorrow, etc. Now he says, no, I act with other people now. I must listen to my family and my comrades who are saying if I go to prison, it's going to be a death sentence and so on. So he's decided to take the emotional route. Let me also say this in conclusion, Jay. Jacob Zuma is hoping for a political solution. In other words, the suspension of the rule of law in order for his interest to be entertained. And I'm saying that because it's not the first time he has done that. In 2009, when he was supposed to go and stand trial, the NEC of the ANC sat down and decided that, no, this is not a prosecution, rather it's not a prosecution, it's a persecution, right? And then they set up a committee led by Lindiwe Sisulu. I'm not surprised to see her in Nkandla there, oblivious of all her responsibilities as a minister, right? In the face of COVID restrictions, being flouted in her presence. Because she was one of those who had a committee that eventually said Jacob Zuma must be off the hook. They got Mpshe, who was the acting NDPP at the time, to go and take out some judgment that was discredited overseas and use it to get Zuma to be off the hook just before the 2009 elections. He is used to this, and we as the country have allowed him to do this. The ANC has allowed him to do it. He was hoping for the same this weekend when the NEC was supposed to meet. Unfortunately, that was postponed. But this is a repeat script. It's a movie that is repeated from 2009, where instead of facing the law, instead of appearing like every other citizen when he's called to the courts to account, he finds a political solution. So the insurrection, or the fake insurrection, I want to call it, that was supposed to happen this weekend for chaos to happen, and that's why he didn't call his supporters to order or tell them to go home, was so that the country can come to a standstill, and then we must find an accommodation for Jacob Zuma, again not to face the law. It cannot be. The line has to be drawn in the sand, and I hope that both the executive and the judiciary will do what is supposed to be done to save our democracy. And you're right, JJ, you were talking on the emotions, Daven. Let me just bring you in here. I mean, he just says he doesn't want to go to jail because of COVID concerns, but then you look at his supporters and the super spreader there. I mean, you see it with the International Criminal Court. So many of those who've been accused always play the ill game. I mean, does it ever work? Well,
so
it shouldn't work.
Jane, what we've seen...
Sorry, Daven, that was to you.
Sorry. So I think JJ's, and I just want to pick up on a point what he talks about. He says there must be a clear distinction between a political and the solution and that of judiciary. And I think really what we need to focus quite squarely on is the rule of law. And Jane, I mean, closing remarks from me, I just want to reflect, and it's words that dates back to 2005. It was the then Chief Justice Pius Langa. And he basically talks about the law and lawyers being guardians of dignity and integrity of the nation. And that's really essentially what the judiciary is there to, insofar as entrenching the fundamental rule of law, the equity between all individuals within the constitutional dispensation. And the arguments at most would be described as disingenuous. JJ talks about the Tuesday application as well, but quite interestingly enough, that if in actual fact Tuesday is unsuccessful, which many seem to suggest, including myself, there will be no option but to then arrest the former president.
All right, let's leave it there. Daven Dass from the Wits University Law Clinic and Power to Truth anchor JJ Tabane. Fascinating chat. Thank you.